Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Today is May the 2nd, 2023. Let's talk boxing. There's a movie coming out on George Foreman's life. Foreman More Than Most is riveting. While I expect the movie to be a success, I don't expect the movie to give the full picture on George Foreman's boxing career, the secret to his success. Let's try to do that right here. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, let's just make a point here. Right now, George Foreman in the late 60s, and understand, Foreman is huge. He's bigger than Sonny Liston by quite a bit. Right? George Foreman is training with punchers. He's surrounded by punchers. He's hanging around Sonny Liston. Understand, and I know Foreman already was well into his career, right? He wins the gold medal in the 68 Olympics. He's well into his career when he runs into Sonny Liston. But I need for people to understand that Sonny Liston is a paradigm shift in boxing. You have very few of them. Right? Sonny Liston is a paradigm shift. Right? Socially, it's not even close. I believe the reason we don't focus on it is because he loses his title to perhaps a bigger paradigm shift in Ali. But understand, Sonny Liston was a guy who was so controversial. His company, the company he kept, was so controversial. His past, prison stint, fight with a cop where he gets a short sentence, even though, according to reports, he broke the cop's leg. Right? Led a lot of people to believe that Sonny was mob related. So understand, Sonny at one point gets called to talk before Congress. Now you had a interesting person in Floyd Patterson, who was the heavyweight champ at the time. And just understand, while Floyd tried to sound proper, had the King's English, carried himself with a certain decorum, viewed himself as an ambassador for the sport, Sonny Liston didn't. Right? Sonny Liston was a guy who was seen on Vegas floors gambling. Right? There's a story about Ali before his fight against Liston, looking for Liston, trying to create a scene, right? Perhaps to sell tickets to the fight. And he finds Liston on a casino floor in Las Vegas, right? Liston's a gambler. They talk with Liston about his past. He said, "The only thing my father gave me was a beating." Right? Sonny had a glare that he would throw at other fighters before fights. Now understand, this is the early 60s. Sonny Liston is a black man in America. Didn't matter who Sonny fought, right? Sonny was the guy who was not afraid to look like the angry black man. In fact, let's go one step further. The disrespectful black man, right? According to folklore, John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, meets up with Floyd Patterson, and he had one bit of advice for Floyd: don't fight Sonny Liston. Now, whatever happened in Liston's fights against Ali, just understand, young men have their heroes. It's clear that George Foreman modeled himself after Sonny Liston. Right? Let me just say, too, I've looked at a bunch of heavyweights. And while my favorite is Jack Johnson, right? Jack Johnson, who brings defense to the heavyweight division. Johnson doesn't translate in today's game. right? And as I look at heavyweights, Liston's good friend, the guy who mentored Liston when Liston arrives in Las Vegas, right? The guy who, quite frankly, is more influential than that. He's the one who saves, arguably, military deserter Sugar Ray Robinson's career, right? Google those facts. Go on Google Bard and look up those facts. Joe Louis, right? Just understand that, to me, when I look at films, Liston's better than Louis. Quite frankly, Liston is one of the best heavyweights ever, right? He just happened to run into a mobile heavyweight, a guy who was bigger than him, right? Ali is bigger than Liston, right? A guy who had a mobile jab, a guy who had exactly the kind of game to beat Sonny Liston. Well, Liston, and this is very important, right? Liston had a unique punching style. It's very unique. When you look at Liston fights, you'll notice that Liston, at times, in fact, for his most devastating punches, in my eyes, does not extend the punch, right? Liston, when he's throwing a punch like a hook, he doesn't extend his arm at all at the elbow. Rather, what Liston would do is he would lock his arm. The arm never moves, right? He would lock his arm, and then everything's body. He would throw his body with a locked arm at you, and he would punch through you. Right now, Liston had a great jab and had other punches, but understand, his hooks are interesting because he's literally throwing his full body behind the hook, and he never extends the arm, right? So he looks wooden at times. When he's throwing punches, you'll notice he leans back. He's not graceful. He's not Ali, right? Ali is hitting you and moving, right? Liston has to be flat-footed because in his punching style, he's locking his elbow and not extending it. He's throwing his entire body. I believe he just locks the hand and then he just throws his body. And he realized that even though he's moving slower than a fast-handed opponent, his punch was as hard as it got on occasion, right? He blows out Floyd Patterson twice, early. Well, I believe George Foreman adopts Sonny Liston's punching style. Folks, the style's so unique, I don't see it anywhere today in the heavyweight division, even among the blessed punchers, Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua, Zhilei Zhang, in the division, right? You just don't have big men throwing their full body behind shots. I believe that's why George Foreman tires in the Rumble in the Jungle. Well, George Foreman, a bigger man than Sonny Liston, right? He's bigger than Liston. He copies Liston's style, not just the glaring at an opponent, but he literally copies Liston's locked arms, both arms locked, where he's throwing a punch and he doesn't go like this. He doesn't extend it. What he does is he walks through you and he just locks the shoulder, locks the elbow, and just leans into it, just moves his body. It's more of a body punch than it is an arm punch. So what I want people to do, and this is old Foreman, right, is look at the Foreman-Jerry Cooney fight. Right, the last knockdown of Jerry Cooney, Foreman walks up to him. There's a certain economy of Foreman's movement when he's older. He walks up to him. You don't know what hand he's going to hit Jerry Cooney with. Then he throws a left hand, and let me just say, it's locked. It's tight. He's moving his entire body, right? You can tell the secret to Foreman is he would throw his entire body behind punches. And I believe Foreman hit as hard as anyone I've seen, right? That includes Tyson. That includes Joshua, right? Foreman, simply put, is on the outer range of hard punchers, right? So let's just talk about a few other things with Foreman, right? Foreman says the guy who hit him the hardest was Ron Lyle. Now understand that fight, and I encourage people to look at that fight, right? Foreman is fighting Ron Lyle, and understand that is simply a fight on who lands a haymaker last, right? That's that fight in a nutshell. Foreman's badly hurt. Of course Foreman is going to be open for counters, because understand, as Foreman's throwing his punches, he's literally going all in. Let me say this too on Foreman. Foreman knocks out Lyle. Ron Lyle is finished. This is the 1970s. I want you to look at the refereeing in that Foreman-Ron Lyle fight. The fight is on YouTube, right? Ron Lyle is over by the ropes, and he's finished, folks. He's finished. But yet, the referee, against a heavy puncher, George Foreman, the referee lets the fight continue, and no one's surprised. Not the broadcasting team, not the fighters themselves, right? Today, especially in the UK, when you're watching a fighter can be buzzed, right? Like George Groves was against Carl Froch, and we're protecting him. In the 70s, it was the opposite, right? Foreman against Ken Norton. I want you to look at Kenny when he hits the canvas. Kenny's trying to pull himself up using the ropes. The ref sees that and continues counting, right? Today, that fight would be waved off immediately, right? But back then, you were a fighter, you were out cold, you couldn't even stand up on your own. You were allowed to grab the ropes and try to pull yourself up and stuff like that. Well, I'll just say this. Not only is Foreman hunting you down and throwing hellacious shots, but understand, Foreman deep in the pocket would push you, right? He's the consummate bully when he's a young man, right? But he has the timing where even against a high activity fighter who's dangerous, Joe Frazier, understand, Frazier's left hook could knock out anyone, right? Even against Joe Frazier twice in both fights, you'll notice Foreman was pushing him because Foreman needed room to channel Sonny Liston. Now, it might shock people, but understand, Liston has one of the best jabs in boxing history. So too did George Foreman. Where Foreman separates himself from Sonny Liston is that Foreman has a defensive construct that Liston doesn't have, right? Foreman would have his hands like this. I believe this defense would beat Deontay Wilder, right? Because when you cross your hands, you take away the other guy's right hand up top, right? Just understand, not only is Foreman's defense exemplary and his jabs exemplary, but the core of his game are these Sonny Liston locked elbow, punch through you, not extend my arms, hooks. And he would, because he was interested in getting his body behind it, he would throw the punches from low down. In other words, as you look at a Foreman film, he's not throwing an overhand right like Joshua does. No, he's getting his body into the punch, and sometimes he's coming up from under you because his game is a balance game. Right? So take a look at some Foreman fights. Understand, too, the history involved here. Right? Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali beat Sonny Liston. He's the man who takes Liston's title. But before that first Ali-Liston fight, understand that he beat another guy who would end up in Foreman's corner. Ali beats Archie Moore, right? Destroys him. Knocks Archie Moore down several times. Archie Moore is legendary at light heavyweight, right? This is before Ali wins a title. Ali was an up-and-coming heavyweight, himself an Olympic gold champion, right? Gold medalist. So understand, when Foreman fights Ali, Archie Moore is in Foreman's corner, as is Grandmaster Flash's uncle, Sandy Sadler. To put this in perspective, Sandy Sadler, who wins the series, by the way, of fights that he has against Willie Pep, Sandy Sadler had 104 career KOs, right? Just understand, Sandy Sadler is one of the biggest names in boxing when he suffers an eye injury in an automobile crash in 1956, right? The height of the 50s. Well, Archie Moore actually had 132 KOs, right? These are the guys who are in Foreman's corner. Now, Sadler, of course, wasn't a heavyweight. But just to understand, Ali had knocked out two of Foreman's idols, right? Archie Moore and Sonny Liston. So I believe Foreman, who could have won the Rumble in the Jungle easily, right? All he has to do is stay in the middle of the ring. All he has to do is prevent having Ali lean on the back of his neck. That happens repeatedly. Understand, there's an age gap in that fight. Ali was the older fighter. The experience showed, right? All Foreman had to do with that jab, keep in mind, Foreman's the champ, was stay in the middle of the ring and pepper Ali with jabs. When Ali goes over to the ropes, all he had to do was motion to Ali to come to the middle of the ring, right? You cannot win the heavyweight title cowering over by the ropes if the champ doesn't participate. Let's also get rid of one of the biggest myths in boxing history. Foreman's strategy in the Rumble in the Jungle is brilliant. He comes out, he's high volume, right? I'm just telling you, and Ali and Alexander Usyk could not survive having a big heavyweight throwing volume and throwing a high percentage of power shots. How do you take that man's title? Foreman's mistake was in not pacing himself. Foreman's real mistake was in being so hyper-aggressive that he walks into an Ali right hand that he doesn't recover from. Let's face it too, the fight wasn't done the right way. The referee, in my opinion, and you yourself look at the count in the Rumble in the Jungle, the referee gives Foreman a 9 count. Right? I'm telling you that Tyson Fury in that first Wilder fight would not have beaten the count that the referee in the Rumble in the Jungle gave George Foreman. And then think it through too. Ali gets his jaw broken by Kenny Norton. He fights Norton 3 times. He fights Joe Frazier 3 times. Frazier beats him the first time. Ali's back for a second time. Ali's back for a third time. Ali does not give George Foreman a rematch. How did that happen? Right? Well, I can tell you why it happened. It's because Foreman was clearly one of the most dangerous fighters of the era. You could only do a rope-a-dope against George Foreman once. You were not going to be able to duplicate that. Right? Foreman, in some ways, is more ferocious than Sonny Liston. Understand, before Liston fights Ali, Liston fights a guy, Eddie Machen, in the Bay Area. Right? And understand, Machen is a mover. Machen is slick from the outside. I believe that fight goes the distance. That's the fight that Ali sees. We know this because Ali tells us later. That's the fight that Ali sees, where Ali decides that movement from the outside could beat Sonny Liston. Right? Well, just understand, Foreman had foot speed that Liston did not have. Right? Ali couldn't avoid Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle. Right? Joe Frazier could not avoid George Foreman in either fight. Right? Kenny Norton has nowhere to go against George Foreman. Right? Foreman moved across the ring. I'm not kidding when I say Foreman was such a ferocious puncher, we worried about Ali's health back then. Right? The closest analog I can come up with in terms of a fighter looking as invincible as George Foreman did in the 1970s in his prime is Mike Tyson. But understand, Tyson, smaller man than Foreman. Right? Foreman was the big menace. Right? Tyson, you thought, oh my goodness, this guy's like a tank. Right? This guy's coming forward, doesn't even have to jab. We were coming out of a balls of your feet era. Now, between you and me, Larry Holmes was a dominant champion. But you didn't fear Larry Holmes like you feared George Foreman. I mean, Larry Holmes you thought was going to win fights. George Foreman you thought was going to hurt people. Right? When you see Ron Lyle out at the end of the George Foreman fight, you fear for Ron Lyle's future. Right? Kenny Norton, when you see Kenny Norton laid out, you fear for Kenny Norton's future. Right? That's how fearsome George Foreman was. Let me also say this too, and it needs to be said. Young fighters need to think about this. You look at all these fighters, and there were some huge paydays, right? I believe Ali and Frazier each got $2.5 million for their first fight. Right? I believe Ali and George Foreman got $5 million for the Rumble in the Jungle. Right? And that's 74 or so, I believe. Right? Fighters got paid money. But understand, the heavyweights who cleaned up, the guys who made the money and kept the money, right? In Foreman's case, maybe he lost the money running a ministry, running his church, his community center. But then he comes back and he makes the money off the grill. Right? Understand, Foreman extremely wealthy right now. Well, it's he and Larry Holmes, right? Holmes from Eastern Pennsylvania. They called him the Eastern Assassin. Bought up many of the buildings in downtown Eastern Pennsylvania. Right? Ali could not match the wealth in his later days of a Larry Holmes or of a George Foreman. Right? It's not how much you make. It's how much you keep, right? It's money management. It's the guys who understand that this endorsement, this grill, matters, right? It's the guys who understand that buying up real estate in eastern Pennsylvania, a town you know well, when it's growing, is a way to have a lot of passive income, right? Joe Frazier, folks, did not keep his money. Muhammad Ali, folks, did not keep much of his money. George Foreman did. Now, I suspect the movie, and I haven't seen the movie. When you see the movie, tell us about it in the comment section of this video. I see Forrest Whitaker, the Godfather of Harlem, one of my favorite actors, right, is in Foreman's corner. In real life, Gil Clancy was in Foreman's corner after, right, guys like Sandy Sadler and Archie Moore. Right? In real life, Foreman surrounded himself with punchers. In real life, Foreman, who's a teenager, when he wins the gold medal in '68 and is criticized, let's remember the '68 Olympics. You had Tommy Smith, you had John Carlos, right, doing a power salute while getting their medals. People were upset. Then you had George Foreman, who folks thought, gee, this is the happy Negro of the Olympic Games. He wins the gold medal, then he's walking around with the American flag, right? No one knows that Foreman's from 5th Ward, Houston, right? As tough a neighborhood as you can get, right? Think Ghetto Boys, right? That rap group, right? No one knows that Foreman has lived a hard life. All people see is a guy with a part in his hair at a time when brothers were going natural, right? And a brother who's waving the American flag at a politicized Olympic Games, right? Well, understand, when Foreman's a pro, he's as sullen as they come, right? He's Sonny Liston, only younger and stronger. Right? His punch style is unique. Take a look at it. To young heavyweights, you definitely, in studying punchers, if you're a big guy, if you're 6'4", right? Not 5'10" like Mike Tyson or 5'11", whatever they say he is, but if you're like 6'4", and if you are big and clunky and you want to throw big punches, and you have the body weight to throw your weight behind it, Foreman is the heavyweight to look at if you're a slugger, right? If you're a jabber, understand, while Foreman had a great jab, it wasn't mobile like Larry Holmes's jab, right? Holmes really is a crown jewel, quite frankly. Let me say this too. During the Holmes era, it was obvious. It was obvious that Larry Holmes was a great heavyweight. That was obvious. Now, what's fascinating is that as you get older, the image changes. Right? The next generation has its own group of heroes. And as they think back in history, right, they forget how dominant some guys were. Right, and so somehow Larry Holmes has been lost in the mix because we all know Mike Tyson takes over the 1980s. Right, Tyson is blowing through guys. The guys he doesn't blow through are hugging him to death during fights, just trying to go the distance. Then, of course, you have the Buster Douglas fight, and everyone knows that Buster Douglas, an excellent heavyweight, was a greater than 30-1 underdog in that fight, and that's unheard of today in the heavyweight division. Right? But I need for people to understand that it's an open question. In fact, it's not so open for some of us. as to whether prime Mike Tyson would have beaten prime Larry Holmes. Understand, when the guys fought, Holmes was no longer unbeaten. Holmes had lost to Michael Spinks, and Holmes had retired. Holmes was out of the ring. It's Don King who reeled him back in. Right? The Holmes who fought Mike Tyson was not prime Larry Holmes. Right? Prime Larry Holmes, if you go back, he fights an epic fight against Kenny Norton, where he needed the last round, and he went out and he got the last round. Right? Just understand, too, Ernie Shavers fought Ali. He fought Larry Holmes. Right? For Ernie, it's clear Larry Holmes was the better fighter. Because for Ernie, and let's face it, too, Ernie fights Ali in the 70s. Really, Ali's two different people, because the Ali in the 60s is just a different level entirely. But Ernie Holmes talks about how Ali's jab didn't really faze him. Larry Holmes's jab, by contrast, was a real punch. Right? You were getting hit with a 2x4. And it's interesting because, understand, Ernie Holmes came this close to knocking out Larry Holmes. He knocks down Larry Holmes. Well, I'll say this. George Foreman, for a stationary jab, has one of the best in boxing history. Now, Foreman, when asked who's the best ever, in a recent interview on The Zone, mentioned Joe Louis. Right? Understand, Foreman is highly technical. When he was on HBO doing boxing fights, he had a jovial persona, right? Back then, he was selling grills. This was Foreman after his comeback or during his comeback. And Foreman was on, and Foreman was, happy-go-lucky, or so it sounded. What I want people to do is to go back and look at a fight Foreman did. It's Floyd Mayweather against Genaro Hernandez. It's when Mayweather picks up the championship. Right? On the telecast, it is George Foreman telling you to watch Mayweather's feet and telling you why Mayweather is a great fighter. And as you listen to Foreman, you understand that Foreman is highly analytical. Right? You shouldn't buy the curt bully from the 70s who answered questions with one word. That's not Foreman, nor is the happy-go-lucky guy who's selling grills when he comes back. Right? Foreman's one of the best analysts I've ever come across. Right? Foreman's take on his victory over Michael Moore is he says, I got close to Moore early in that fight. I could have hit him with my best punch. He said, but Moore was 100% at that time. So even if I hit him with my best punch, he probably could have taken it. That's debatable, by the way, but Foreman believed Moore could have taken his best punch and then would have stayed away from him the rest of the fight. Right? So what Foreman does, and he admitted this in an interview, is he throws a punch that's not his best punch. He needed to convince Michael Moore that Michael Moore could take his punch. So Moore then felt comfortable being close to Foreman. You get to the later rounds, George Foreman turns out the lights on him. Right? That's the thought process with George Foreman. When you see Foreman fights, you'll also notice that he's willing to take punches, to land his punches. He's complimentary of fighters, right? He's one of these guys who's grateful to the game. But I have no doubt in my mind he'd beat Alexander Usyk. And I'm someone who believes Usyk probably beats Tyson Fury. We'll find out. Right? If you get one takeaway from this video, look at Foreman's unique punching style on hooks. Then pull up a film of Sonny Liston, especially his fights against Floyd Patterson. And you're going to notice that Foreman is modeling himself after Sonny Liston, and that both men knew how to throw their body behind punches and to throw body punches. Really, the arm is secondary. What these guys are doing is leaning into shots with their body. Foreman is close to Joe Frazier. He pushes Frazier away. So as Frazier comes back forward, Foreman's able to lean into shots to finish him. Anyway, that's how I see it. Foreman's one of the best heavyweights in history. I need for people to take a hard look at him. That Rumble in the Jungle, arguably, is the fight of the 70s with the Thriller in Manila. Right? Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.